Caitlyn is a 33-year-old woman living in coastal Virginia. She was diagnosed with IH 2 years ago and has been on Xywav for about 18 months, and she is now thriving in her own way. However, her journey of understanding herself and her health started long before she was formally diagnosed with IH. Caitlyn was once a promising military pediatric resident with a bright future in developmental behavioural paediatrics. And she's excited to share how she came to embrace her IH brain and the life she now leads as a retired, unemployed veteran and cat mom. Let's welcome Caitlyn. Hi, Caitlyn. It is really good to have this conversation with you. I'm super excited to have it, and not least because I think you have an incredible story, and I'm really grateful that you're going to share that with our community. Not least because I think your remarkable journey has had some kind of unconventional twists and turns, which I think will be really beneficial for everyone to hear. So welcome to Living With, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and having this conversation with you.
Right, so let's start at the beginning. We always like to ask this just to give the conversation some context. Where were you born? What was your early life like up until your diagnosis with idiopathic hypersomnia?
Sure. Well, I spent the first couple years of my life moving around, but I really spent the bulk of my life in coastal Virginia, and I definitely call that home. I feel like wherever you learn to drive is home. It's like where you really learn your surroundings and that kind of thing. And I've lived here for, 28 plus years, and I'm 33 now, and it's very familiar. And my career ultimately kept me here also. So it really has felt like home. And I actually decided to settle down here too. I recently bought a townhome. So I'm very excited to continue staying in this area. It is, there's something you said about being like familiar, but also around like a support system and that kind of thing. So, in terms of my life before IH, which is what I have, I am the oldest of three and very like white collar family, but at the same time, there was not this like pressure to perform or anything like that. It was very like my parents were very present and really wanted us kids to sort of pursue whatever we wanted. And at the time in my life, I was a very active, like competitive swimmer. So I swam year round all through middle school and high school. By the time I was in like junior, senior year, I was training 23 hours a week, and like we just had the Olympics, and like that was very much the life I was living. Is not Olympic level, but like the type of training elite athletes in that caliber were doing, like that was my life. And then I would go to school, and I ultimately got recruited to swim at the school that I wanted to go to, which was Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire, and had an amazing experience. Didn't swim all 4 years just because the team wasn't like my people, right? Like I just fell out of love with swimming, in part because there just was a disconnect between competing at a D1 level and what my love for the sport was, which was the training. Actually, I just loved training. And that actually freed up so much of my experience for college. And I really feel like I found myself in college and really started to grow and become the person, like start on that like personal growth path that I've been on when you move away from home. And I discovered like anthropology, and ultimately wound up living in Haiti for 9 months after college. And that was an incredibly gratifying experience. I wound up like working with community health workers and managing a clinic and that sort of thing before moving back to my hometown to go to medical school. And the Air Force wound up paying for medical school, and I then wound up pursuing my pediatric residency with the Air Force. And it was during my pediatric residency that my health just like I noticed changes in myself, and took a leave of absence that was very supported by my leadership, and I'm very grateful for that. Really tried to suss things out, and was able to come back for a time, and then things just started to snowball, and took another leave of absence, and really identified that things were not as they should be, and was ultimately medically retired because my condition was not commensurate with practicing medicine or being an Air Force officer. And it's only been since being out that I have even more conviction on that. And I'm very grateful for having had the life I had in military medicine and in pediatrics, but now am unemployed as a retired veteran.
Thank you for sharing, Caitlyn. That's quite a journey. Could you explain, when you talk about how you noticed changes in yourself, that you took, 2 medical leave of absences? What were those changes, or perhaps even what were those symptoms?
In hindsight, my the changes that were going on with my health started when I was on that Air Force scholarship for med school. Things that I noticed but didn't really think much of because I was in medical school and then residency. But as someone who was like an early riser all my life, was swimming, all of a sudden in med school, I was hitting the snooze button all the time. And I was struggling with sleep. I started getting migraines. I was getting migraines and migraines. And so it was actually during medical school when I was started my treatment for migraines. And it was several years before I started getting my migraines managed. So seeking help for migraines was my first step, and that was in medical school. That was the first thing that really I sought medical help for, was migraines. And then in residency during orientation, I learned that the hospital provided supportive talk therapy for all providers. And it was just like, there's no questions asked, like you can go and sign up. And I was like, oh, well, I'm starting this new thing. Like that would be so great. And it was during my supportive talk therapy that my mental health started to decline. And I was like, clearly this is not working. We need to take additional, like maybe the rapport is not right. I need something else. So I just advocated for a different therapist, as well as maybe I needed some medication management. So I actually got plugged in with a psychiatrist and switched over to acceptance and commitment therapy. That treatment team was who I was plugged in with when I took my first leave of absence, which was actually for like low mood in the setting of my clinical rotations, because I didn't at the time think like the sleep was the issue. I thought like the low mood was the issue. And with that treatment team, seemed like my mood improved, etc. And it was really interesting in hindsight that it was on specific rotations where I wasn't getting good sleep that triggered me getting like advocating for a leave of absence. And it was on the leave of absences where my mood would improve, combination of the right meds and therapy, but my sleep would still be really erratic. And it looked for a time like severe insomnia, vivid dreams, and just very abnormal, even though my mood scores on all the screenings would improve. And my hours in bed would suggest that I shouldn't be so tired during the day. But that is when like my second leave of absence, that was triggered by like a poor sleep rotation. My therapist referred me to sleep med. And
interesting.
upon hearing my story with the vivid dreams and the insomnia-like symptoms, the first initial impression was, oh, like potentially narcolepsy. I actually wound up going through the med board process and getting out before I actually was diagnosed and got my MSLT, and it turned out IH.
Okay. So you talked about having very kind of unusual sleep patterns at night. You talked about insomnia, but also extended periods in bed. Did you have any daytime symptoms, Caitlyn?
Yes. Again, hindsight's 2020, but my daytime symptoms that actually have been progressive until probably more recently when I've been on Xywav and it's sort of stabilized. But my daytime symptoms are, even though I don't have cataplexy, when I have that excess daytime sleepiness, I have low tone. And so driving in particular is one of my more sedating activities, and driving, especially when it's really bright out. So I now know to keep sunglasses in the car, but the squinting, I think, is what like makes me extra sleepy. And so I'll like droop. And this is regardless of driving, but when I'm super sleepy, I kind of droop and I lose like truncal tone and sort of generalized tone. And so I remember before I was diagnosed, before I was treated, I would be driving and my head would be barely at the steering wheel level. Mind you, I'm 5'10" and I'm equally torso and legs. And so like me driving slumped over, eyes like barely at the steering wheel because I was so tired. So I did have like low tone, and I've noticed that like sleepy and writing, my handwriting would drastically fall off in terms of like legibility because I just like would fatigue with my writing and like my muscle tone and that kind of thing. So beyond the daytime sleepiness, there were those signs. I've also been increasingly sensitive to progesterone. And I know that progesterone and GABA have an interesting interaction. And so I've had to switch from like my Mirena IUD to a copper IUD, and I get hallucinations during the higher progesterone times of my cycle and that sort of thing. And so there are other things that I now know are probably related to my IH. I'm also like the only one in my family to be hypermobile, and like there are other things that I think are all sort of related, but at the time I felt hitting snooze and having that sleep inertia was a big part of it. That was very different for me. I used to be someone who would like wake up, poof, like I could just like get up. And I would be someone who, even though I was like once training 23 hours a week, I never fell asleep in class, never did any of that. Like I was used someone who could get by with very little sleep. And I went to someone who like had to hit snooze 10 times to just get out of bed for my rotations and that kind of thing.
Wow. Okay. So your daytime symptoms, it's not surprising then that your therapist referred you, sort of mentioned the word narcolepsy, because you're talking about low tone, you know, when you say driving. How was that kind of cleared up towards you having a diagnosis of IH? Because that's sort of commonly confusing. But obviously everyone, you know, people were probably thinking low tone, potentially cataplexy, but you don't have cataplexy, right?
I don't have cataplexy. Nothing like triggers a low tone event. It just is more pronounced when I'm sleepy. And my MSLT is very definitively IH. It's not my MSLT is not narcolepsy, and my HLA does not show genetic markers for narcolepsy. So from that standpoint, it's diagnostically, I've been told that it's IH and non-narcolepsy, but I also understand for me that it's like a spectrum. And as a resident, I actually heard a great grand rounds on them and on these sleep disorders. And it made sense to me that like there's like potential to like kind of convert. So it like doesn't surprise me that I could potentially have some features that, oh, like my low tone and that kind of thing. Like it doesn't surprise me, but I don't have like emotional events or sudden events that will put me into a low tone. It's just more noticeable when I'm tired.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that I have acquired sort of attention deficit type symptoms with my brain for someone who used to not have them. I'm very distractible now. I have disordered thinking, and my stimulant doesn't seem to help with those things. So it's very interesting to reflect on the fact that I used to not have that and now I do. So there are those daytime symptoms also, the difficulty with not and temporal-spatial awareness and those kind of things that are new and weren't there before.
Yeah. So you mentioned sleep inertia, and obviously that's sort of a distinct characteristic of IH. What did sleep inertia look like for you?
Sleep inertia for me, and I've had to figure out like, is it sleep inertia, especially since being on Xywav, is it sleep inertia versus like a Xywav linger effect? But for me, sleep inertia is the fact that it would take me 3 hours in the morning to get ready and shake off that like profound sleepiness to the point where I'm like ready to get out the door. And I'm someone who can pass as someone perfectly ready for the day and functional. And talking definitely wakes me up and I can get going. But there are days where I don't like shake off sleep at all, despite stimulants. And before I had been on Xywav, it was 3 hours to get out the door for an appointment. And the process of going from alarms, many of which were snooze, to getting out of bed, to getting myself ready, it was lucky if I ate breakfast because of just the process and the weightiness of the body and the profound like sleepiness, very different from fatigue, but just like the overt feeling that like you're drudging through cement, and it's whether I got like 5 hours or 10 hours, like it was very difficult to get my morning routine shorter than like 3 hours. And
Yeah,
a
it's really
shower would
interesting.
take like an hour.
Yeah. So I know that when we met before, and this was such a helpful conversation, and I think you and I aligned on many things, but one of them was the spoon theory. What is that kind of like concept meant to you in terms of two things? One of them is like moving you forward on like a mental health journey that coexists with your physical health journey, but also perhaps in your explanation of your condition to those around you.
Absolutely. Spoon theory, spoon theory for me, when I discovered it, an aunt told me about it, and it was a game changer just because it's a paradigm that I can share with others. It was first created, I think, in like the early aughts, and I've seen lots of different illustrations of it online. But for me, the most significant one is by this amazing speech language pathologist who is an incredible illustrator on Instagram, NeuroWild. And back in like October of 22, she posted on spoon theory and made it super generalizable for like every person. And I love the idea that people can have this concept of a spoon, like a number of spoons, like an arsenal of spoons or a quiver of spoons, however you want to think about it. And I think of my mind in a lot of imagery. So instead of like bandwidth, which is not really tangible to me, or energy, which is not really tangible to me, I have these spoons that I have at my disposal. I don't have a set number, but activities or tasks or interactions, what have you, are either spoon consumptive, spoon giving, or spoon neutral. And I remember a time when basic activities of daily living, like brushing my teeth, would have been spoon neutral. I didn't have to think about it. It just happened. And now there are days when brushing my teeth is too spoon consumptive for the amount of spoons I have. And so I keep fluoride containing mouthwash just for those days where don't have enough spoons to brush my teeth. So for me, talking about spoons is a way that I can share with others also like what I am up for in any given moment if I'm interacting with others. I think it's a great way to say like, hey, I thought I was going to be able to meet up for lunch today, but I don't have the spoons. And it's not a reflection on them. It's not a reflection on my interest in meeting. It's just like, I don't have the spoons. I don't have the spoons. And sometimes like I want to go do something, but I have to be honest with myself and honor my spoon level. So it's taken a long time, but I've now gotten to the point in my life, and largely because I am not working and I can do this, but I no longer self-abandon, but I honor myself so that I can build that self-trust. And I really do strive to honor my spoon balance on not just a day-to-day basis, but like a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a really interesting perspective because we've been sort of trying to communicate and with the spoon theory in all sorts of ways as an organization, and just putting that, as you say, paradigm out there for people to understand. But what I hear, and this is so powerful, and sort of you're helping me process some of this as well, is that it also affords a lot of self-compassion.
That's been a big thing
Yeah.
for me, especially. And I think the other thing that as someone who has fewer spoons than someone without IH, or someone who doesn't have lower spoons, right? Chronic fatigue syndrome, or really anything that just like normal, typical things that wouldn't require spoons, like just drain you, right? And again, like you can have fewer spoons on any given day just because like you're taxed or what have you. And learning how to like budget your spoons, like if you can talk about spoons, you can learn how to respond when you have lower spoons, or hey, like I have lower spoons,
Or
I just
extra.
need 5 minutes, like or extra. You can be like, hey, I got spoons, I got it, like that kind of thing. So for me, I think another aspect of adjusting to life with IH and like my new paradigm has really been, people are going to see what they see. They're going to see what they think is less, perhaps. For me, it's like low spoons. For them, it may be lazy. It may be put whatever judgment they want on it. For them, they might assume low spoons. Who knows? But for me, I've realized that that's on them. It's
Right.
not on me to take on their assumptions, nor do I owe them an explanation. I don't need to share out of obligation. I get to share when I want to. I get to really embrace like choosing how I want to be seen in a lot of ways. Like if they are going to put on me like the laziness, I owe it to myself to, yes, check. Like, am I low spoons or am I avoiding because of something in my subconscious, or am I avoiding because of something I'm like conscious about and actually avoiding? That's on me to figure out, but that's not on anyone else to pass judgment on. So
Yeah.
I can do that self-check to make sure it's one of those three things, but
Yeah.
no one has a right to assume. And if they're curious, like, hey, is it low spoons, or like, do you need to like be a little curious about, is it avoiding? That's for me and my therapist. That's not for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you strike me, and again, refer to us when we first met, that, you've done a lot of parallel work alongside your diagnostic journey, and in
Yes.
the face of all the massive changes that you've had as a result of your condition of having IH that are both personal and professional. And I think one of the things I was so struck by, Caitlyn, is how you've kind of paralleled that journey with sort of, for want of a better description, a mental health journey. And it seems on the surface you've not let that lag.
I
And
appreciate
that's
that.
really, that's really sort of gives me goosebumps, because I think for a lot of us, we're kind of years behind and catching up. And now I'm going to go into therapy. Now I'm going to, but you seem to have like had the insight to kind of parallel those two journeys. Can you speak to the acceptance and commitment therapy that has been so
Yeah,
significant for your healing?
absolutely. And I could not be more grateful for the opportunity to have pursued that. It was something I had never heard of. Like, I had heard of CBT, I'd heard of DBT, I'd heard of different types of therapies. And for anyone starting therapy or engaging in therapy, one of the things I would absolutely recommend is like, know what type of therapy you're engaging in. And for me, ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, was a game changer, because when I started ACT, I didn't necessarily love who I was. Like, I was proud of certain accomplishments, but my identity was sort of wrapped up in accomplishments, which is what a lot of people hold on to, right? In terms of my character, I had pervasive self-loathing. I couldn't be paid to say good things about myself. Like, I was self-lacerating. I was very judgmental. I was that typical, or very, very, very common, like, not kind to myself in here, right? Over 2.5 years, that has completely 180'd, and I can say with true honesty and like honest self-awareness that I am my best friend. I have not had a negative self comment to myself in probably 3 years, and I have true self-acceptance and self-compassion. And that has really stemmed from acceptance and commitment therapy, which I feel like the name, as I understood it, was informed what it was about. So as I came to understand it, acceptance and commitment therapy is learning to accept and be accepting of the full breadth of the human experience. So the thoughts and feelings that have historically been considered or typically been considered like uncomfortable or less pleasant or negative. All those judgments just go away, and you learn to like just be at peace and remove that judgment so that you can get curious when those uncomfortable feelings and thoughts arise, but they're there and you can sit with it and just be comfortable in the uncomfortable without judgment. And when you learn those skills of acceptance, you can then behave in ways that align with your values. And that's that commitment part. You want to use that acceptance to commit to a life of meaning that is based in your values. And so the way that looked like for me is my therapist told me when I got there, my internal landscape was a hole, and my only tool was a shovel. But eventually I got out of the hole and I saw the ruts, and I saw my landscape were just like all these ruts that I eventually got to navigate and learn. And then now I can see all the beautiful landscape that is my internal landscape. And I have all these tools that are at my disposal that I can use and navigate clearly and openly and with confidence and without judgment. And I can face whatever comes, whether it's stormy or if I stumble, like I know exactly what's going on and that kind of thing. And so it is just very peaceful and accepting. And I can choose a life that is full of conviction and backed by like my value-based priorities.
Yeah, it's huge. So, did you specifically seek out a therapist for ACT, or did you just sort of get lucky and they said, "Oh, let's work on this"?
I got really lucky.
Okay.
I was in that supportive talk therapy and mentioned I was like 11 sessions in and my mental health had deteriorated. I actually at the time was in a very abusive relationship and became like had a lot of SI out of when I hadn't before. And I was like, I don't think this is working out. I need to see someone else. And I just happened to get plugged in with someone who heard what was going on, and she really thought ACT was the right move for me. And she was a phenomenal practitioner and really, really helped me out. Yep. After 2.5 years of that, I have really, I now autopilot those tenets, and now I'm in psychodynamic psychotherapy with a different therapist, but I am really glad I like did them in that order. And it just happened that I had those therapists who really invested in me. And so it was lucky, but I would, knowing what I know now, I would seek it out.
Yeah. So if someone was either looking to kind of address a lot of their mental health, kind of in parallel with their diagnosis, and you're thinking about therapy or you're in therapy, how do you find someone who's kind of like got, that experience or specialty in acceptance and commitment therapy?
So I believe Psychology Today helps you look up different practitioners. If you're curious about ACT, there's a couple really good podcasts. There's this Inside Mental Health podcast. It's called What is ACT? It's 30 minutes, and it's from February 25th of 21. The guest is Dr. Stephen Hayes. He's one of the originators of ACT. He also is on a couple different podcasts. So Dr. Stephen Hayes is a great person to look up. He has a number of books out. If you go to like Thrift Books or alibraries.com or any place that you want to buy a book, there are a number of ACT workbooks. There's a series called Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook Series that are pretty good. Other authors are Russ Harris and Matthew McKay. They do some really good ACT workbooks. If you want another short primer for ACT, just like that initial 30-minute podcast, there's a primer or a pocketbook called The Illustrated Happiness Trap. That is a great book. I will say some of the tips and tricks that helped make ACT stick for me is I was very intentional about how I was with language. Changing my language changed my thoughts. And for me, my internal landscape is my thoughts, my feelings, my values, and then the external manifestation of those language and behaviors. And so with me being very intentional with my language, so I detached from my feelings. So instead of like, I am happy, I notice I am happy, or I notice I am feeling happy. So it's like, I'm not the emotion. I can notice I am feeling happy. So like I'm further from it, which creates a whole lot of distance, especially from those uncomfortable feelings. And so the more intentional I am with my language, so like a gray rainy day, instead of it being crummy or rotten, like, oh, it's just
I'm having a
gray.
bad day. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So I'm very intentional with my language, and that doesn't always sit with other people because it is different, but it helped me because it rewired my brain.
Yeah, it's interesting because feelings aren't final, are they? And I think if you can, and also that whole negative self-talk, which becomes a spiral, and our language is so powerful, especially our self-talk. That you'd think that this would be sort of an obvious start in, especially when dealing with such a massive kind of U-turn in your life, like developing a diagnosis of chronic ill health, where, that's a transformative experience. Your life is on a completely different trajectory, and it's just so difficult to cope physically and mentally and emotionally.
Yeah. And so I was on this journey with ACT when I realized that my career was going to change. And so I'm actually very grateful for that timeline, because I was already practicing these skills and getting these skills in place when I realized I needed to really evaluate if and how I would navigate returning to medicine, if that was even possible. And I realized that while my mental health component, so I do fundamentally have major depressive disorder that is on a pretty resistant pathway. So right now I'm pretty well managed, but there is like a psychotic component to it and other factors. But right now it's fairly managed. And even with that, there was a lot of mixed bag initially when I was retiring that couldn't really sort out the sleep component. And so at the time when I was retiring, when I was considering all of this, I had to think about, so how would practicing medicine look like? And the reasons I left medicine, now being 2 years out, I am so grateful that my leadership supported me, because I have even more conviction now. The fact that I was struggling with my memory is so much a factor. And I know that that's a huge part of IH, is that like conversational memory, so difficult. Like I was trying to learn how to be a pediatrician and remember what I was supposed to ask during a patient encounter. But then I was also trying to remember what they were telling me. And that was becoming increasingly difficult. And then the tasking. So after my clinic day, remembering to put in orders and prescriptions and write the notes, and my newly acquired like chaotic, disorganized thinking and trying to manage my tasks, it was becoming incredibly difficult. I once wrote a book chapter, and now it's like I'm struggling to write a clinic note and write emails. And so putting words on page became incredibly difficult.
Right.
And ultimately, a lot of caregivers know this, like if you're a caregiver, it's hard to care for others if you're not caring for yourself. And so all of those things became increasingly difficult. And at the end of the day, I was not going to be good for my patients and their families if I was just struggling to have enough spoons to
Yeah.
shower and brush my teeth.
Yeah, it's such a huge difference, your pre-IH brain, I suppose, to your IH brain. And that must have been really very pressured and frightening, actually, I think, when you're in such a responsible role. How do you kind of reconcile those two different brains, Caitlyn?
I think for me, the biggest part is the space that I give myself, and like the patience and grace I have for myself for my current self. I don't hold, like, I notice that it's different, but I don't, it's been a long time since I've felt sad or frustrated over the differences. But when I do feel sad and frustrated, I am very good at self-validating. Like those are very real emotions that are valid. Like the days when I give myself a break from my stimulant because I don't like because my soft palate is sore from the bruxism, right? Like
Okay.
I am feeling extra sleepy, and like the spoon deficit is just such that I'm even more grateful that I don't have obligations, right? So I am not saying I'm grateful because it's this forced gratefulness or forced positivity. I generally experience that gratefulness because I know not everyone has that as well as I am. But I also can feel that. Like I remember that like feeling where my body like didn't droop and I am not in need of like Adderall to just like function through my day, or I could drive after 7 p.m. at night, or right. And laundry didn't sit unfolded for 10 days or something like that. Like there's all these layers, and I can remember a time when, but I'm also really grateful that I feel like I'm very much thriving more now than ever before because of the brain I have. And
Yeah.
I know without a shadow of a doubt, my therapized brain is one that I wouldn't trade for anything, even if it does have IH and does have all the other things that I like, the comorbidities and all this stuff. Like I
Right.
truly love myself, even if there are hard days.
Such an inspiring person, and really very grateful for you sharing, because it is still making yourself vulnerable and using a significant amount of spoons to talk to me today. But I do think this is in some ways pretty radical, actually, Caitlyn, because quite a lot of the time we talk about medication, of course, and all sorts of coping strategy, and all of it's valid. And yet, we still kind of struggle as a community with stigma and perceptions about society and our community that have upon us with this like crazy fast-paced life and success, whatever that means and looks like to most people.
Sure.
And, it's such a obvious thing for people to kind of fall into negative self-talk and feel like they're failing, and to have a handle on that and to share that with with all of us is really significant. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'm always challenged when I speak to you and kind of run off and look things up and learn. So thank you for sharing that with all of us.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. And don't get me wrong, I'm on a lot of medication, and I have had to challenge myself as a provider and reach out to my resources in the pharmacy community to make sure that I really know what it is I'm taking, what is it treating. I'm highly attuned to my symptoms and my body, and work really hard to make sure that, okay, so is this medicine the lowest dose that I can take for this particular symptom? And I certainly I have that medication for all my comorbidities, et cetera, but I work really hard to streamline that, as well as work on the behavioral aspect and make sure okay, my sleep hygiene, I know what it needs to be. And if I fall off, I know what's going to happen and that kind of thing. And I also know that I will contend with different things, and I have to challenge myself to practice verbal boundaries and true vulnerability versus pseudo vulnerability, and contend with those expectations from others, while also really hoping for well wishes versus check-ins, and hoping for others to trust that I am taking care of myself, as opposed to seeing me as someone who's fragile or broken. And when people offer solutions, assuming good intentions, even though the impact is that, they think I'm broken or something like that. And it's no, they assume well, they just think they know how to take care of me. It's all good.
Yeah, it's really interesting, as you said, and we probably should wrap up, but the power of language, and that, the brokenness with ill health, and, all sorts of language that's kind of upon us, but extremely unhelpful and actually pretty old-fashioned as well, and kind of smacks of stigma. So well done for being a pioneer in changing all of that, because it's about time. We have a lot to learn and a long way to go, but thank you for helping us all on that journey.
Well, thank you for talking with me and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.